So this is the second installment of our retirement series. If you were able to join us for the first episode, we focused on life leading up to retirement, steps that you need to take to prepare for retirement. And tonight we're going to focus more on life after retirement. I will have the panelists introduce themselves again. I'll just briefly touch on their names. We have Dr. George Wolters, Dr. Raymond Seifert, Dr. Merrill Mirman, and Dr. Brent Long. Gentlemen, if you would be willing to give us just, again, a brief synopsis of your specialty, where you're located, and how you wound up, the steps that took you into retirement in the first place. Dr. Wolters, we'll start with you, our newly elected Vice President for the Pennsylvania Osteopathic Medical Association. Congratulations. So,
thank you.
Now he knows what he's going to do with retirement.
I'm an emergency, or was an emergency physician, practicing in the eastern part of the state, mostly around Philadelphia. I retired. Unlike the other members of the panel, I had a disabling illness. My right ankle blew out, and I wound up suddenly being retired. Worked out very well, though. I can't argue with it. I can't think of anything else except Vice President's been interesting.
You're only 2 weeks in.
Yeah, just another 50 to go.
Dr. Long, how about you?
Well, I was in practice. I'm a recovering family practitioner in Clarion County in the western part of the state. Started in 1981, retired about 6 years ago.
Okay.
Started when I was 62 that I think I'm going to land the plane, but I felt good. Just for some reason, it just didn't feel right. 65, I thought, this is it. I'm going to do it. Again, my health was pretty good. Decided, I'm going to push it off a little bit. We're looking for somebody to replace me in my practice. And at age 67, I realized it was time. It was time to land the plane, and we've been retired for, like I said, the last 6 years.
Okay. Dr. Mirman, how about you? You're muted, sir.
Let's try it this way. How's that?
That's great. Thank you.
Also, push the button, you know that story. After 50 years of practice of pain management, chronic ambulatory pain management, I said, I've had enough. And we've talked about that. When the time comes, the time comes. And as Dr. Wolters has pointed out in our last session, it, everyone here has mentioned that. And it may not come when you thought it was going to come. But when it happens, it's nice to bow out gracefully if you have the opportunity, which I did. And yes, as Dr. Long said, I turned my practice over to somebody who was willing to accept it. And I felt good about that. And I've been transitioned to another position, not being a physician. I still hold my license. I still do teaching, but I walked into another profession. So that's that, Angie.
Okay. And Dr. Seifert, clearly retirement life is treating you well.
It is. I'm an anesthesiologist by training. I was faculty at the University of Pittsburgh and academic faculty, and then I became a clinical faculty member there. And I too had to leave medicine because of a disability. I had a cerebral hemorrhage and spent a year in cognitive rehab, but my memory was still a little suspect. And my lovely wife is a musculoskeletal radiologist, and I didn't feel the need to have to go to work every day to put bread on the table. So, and maybe somebody get hurt because I'd make a mistake. I had a dual major in college, and one of them was education. And I spent the last 17 years in teaching at LECOM. I taught ONT, physical diagnosis with them 2 or 3 days a week. And that's what I had done for the last 17 years. It was very helpful in my cognitive recovery and things like that. So working part-time, I was sort of ready to move right into full retirement, after that. It wasn't a big transition for me.
That's great. So I want to let everybody that's attending our webinar know, we do have lead panelists, but this is very much intended to be an open discussion. If at any point in time you have a comment or a question, you can either raise your hand using the raise your hand function on your Zoom meeting, or you can type a question into the chat and either Jason or I will see it and ask it to the panelists. So I do have some general questions for our panelists, and I know some of the physicians attending tonight are already retired. If you have your own experience that you would like to share, again, please raise your hand or put a comment in the chat and we'll get to you. So one of the things that we wanted to discuss tonight was, what did you do on your first day of retirement? Sleep in a little bit? Was it hard to sleep in? I don't know. I mean, I'm at the stage in my life where sleeping sounds fantastic, but Dr. Long, what did you do?
I can only speak for myself, but first day of retirement really was a continuation of shutting down the office. I had my own office, and therefore you have to make the arrangements, do all the things about selling the office, cleaning out the office, keeping the records, taking care of whatever personnel you have, seeing what needs to be done financially and record keeping with them. And therefore, in my case, it was not an abrupt walk out the door and do something else. It was a question of spending some time. And I had that time given to me so I could transition easily without getting any great pangs out of it. And also you have to field off those few patients who didn't get the message and they keep calling and you have to handle that. So therefore there was a transition period. It wasn't extensive, but definitely was there. And that's how, when you're in solo practice, I believe that's the general way things are being done. And that was my answer, Angie.
Angie, mine was similar but different, if that makes sense. I think we all had that angst when we walked out the door for the last time. But for me, it was kind of a 2 or 3 year process as we eased into it. That Thursday, December 22nd, which was my last day, when I left and I stayed away purposely because I had started a group. There was 3 physicians and several PAs. And I think one of the things that you don't want to do if you're in a group is kind of hang around, because it's confusing for the patients, confusing for the staff. Your partners want to move on. And they were very gracious with me. When I walked out, I was able to walk out. But the interesting thing, to your point, Ange, when I was in college, I could have slept till noon every day. Med school was different. It was a time of excitement and learning and a lot of long hours, staying up late. And that continued, especially when I was doing obstetrics the first 12 years when I was in practice, getting called out. It was just, my experience is no different than most of these guys. We're just not great sleepers because you're always getting that call from the ER, from the nursing home for a sleeper, for, just crazy stuff. That night, December 22nd, 2016, honest to goodness, gang, it was the first night I slept from the time my head hit the pillow till I got up in the morning, and we left for a 9-hour trip to New Hampshire to be with my grandchildren. It hasn't happened since, but that night it was a gift. I don't know whether it was turning the beeper in. I don't know whether it was shutting off my cell phone at night by my pillow instead of having it on, but I slept the sleep of the dead that night. So that was a gift.
That sounds amazing right now.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So, Dr. Wolters, what did you do on your first day of retirement?
Actually, I was getting an MRI and worried that the ID specialist was wrong and I didn't have cancer. So I know. I think what I was kind of amazed at was the lack of sleep. It took about 6 months before I could settle down to having like a normal sleep pattern. I mean, those of you who know me, I stopped eating. That's not me. I mean, I love food.
Mhm.
But I was surprised at how long it took before I got back into like normal activities. And the only other thing I was amazed at, and it started the first day, the number of people who were actually nice. I mean, I expected it from my partners and my friends, but people would come up and ask how you were doing. And I was in the hospital getting testing, so there were people I knew. Surprisingly, people, I mean, I was an ER doc. People actually were really nice, which was confusing at first. I wasn't used to that.
When did you finally enjoy your first fresh pizza and your first fresh cup of coffee?
It took, well, the coffee, my taste buds are gone. I mean, you can give me crappy coffee and I don't notice anymore. Again, the only thing I'd recommend, especially if we're talking to people who haven't been through it, I never expected to suffer from any kind of depression or variant or any of that stuff. And I did. At the time, I didn't know it, but just give yourself months before you're going to settle into the pattern that will be the rest of your life. Once you do settle in, it's great. I think we'll all agree on that. It's the best time I've had since high school.
Well, it's a perfect
That's because you're the POMA vice
note to
president.
make. Yeah. Well, that was also a perfect note to make in the middle of Mental Health Awareness Month. So fantastic. Dr. Seifert, what about you? What did you do on your first day of retirement?
It was liberating. It really was. The weight was off my shoulder because with my cognitive issues, it would take me much longer to develop a medical school quality lecture, anatomy of the shoulder, problems with the shoulder, testing for the shoulder, and to do the OMT labs and things like that. It would take me about 10 days to do one lecture. And then the labs, would be 4 hours of that, along that. So it was very physically demanding, and just to be sort of free of all that. I do kind of miss it, but then I kind of don't too. I'm glad to be done.
Yeah. I can certainly. I mean, I'm hopefully several years away from retirement, but I can certainly understand the missing it and not missing it at the same time. So what did you do during the first 6 months of your full retirement? Did you plan a trip? Did you have a special house project? What did?
No special plans. It was kind of business as usual after that, but it was just, I felt about 5 pounds lighter just because of that. So we didn't plan or do anything special because I retired at the end of December. So it was holidays, grandkids, and things like that. And my wife was still working at the time. And so there really wasn't anything special. I wish I had a better story for that, but that was it. It was just, go through the holidays, kids, grandkids, all that stuff. And then February, March, we would maybe come down to Florida for a little while and stuff like that.
I know at least 2 of you now have mentioned that you retired right before the holidays and just at the end of December. That seems to be a ideal time to do it if you have a choice.
Well, it was the end of the semester. That for me was the end of the semester of teaching. Final exams, oral exams were done. So that was the perfect time for me.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Anybody else have any recommendations? Was there a specific time of year that worked well for you?
Well, in my case, the decision was made, as I mentioned, the time has come. It was a question of timing, and I did it based on taxes and the tax season. So we wouldn't get mixed up one year with another year and partial returns coming in from insurance and payments, and then dragging people on through the holidays, because once again, it was December, and you have a couple of holidays in a row, one after the other, and that throws your timing off in the office. You have personnel, which I had hired. They would be put under the same kind of ambiguity. So we decided in November to call it quits at the end of December, and they gave everybody time to group for the following year with a clean slate.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. How have your relationships with your families changed since you retired? Pros and cons, because I'm sure there's pluses and minuses to both sides to being around everybody all the time now. Dr. Long, we'll start with you.
With family, how did things change with family?
Yes.
First of all, it changed in a positive way, which you would expect, in that my parents were old. My dad is 98 and my mom, she passed away about 2 years ago now. She was 95. So, but they were healthy. And they lived in Mercer, which was about an hour from me. I got a chance for the first time to visit them on a regular basis, not once a month or when I was in the area or a holiday, but just to go over in the middle of the week and sit there and have lunch with them on their deck in the backyard. That was a big change, and it was welcome for them because they were at a time in their life where they'd outlived most of their friends, certainly most of the family, and so it was good. The ones that were always calling you and wanting their acne medicine filled or their amoxicillin when you weren't examining them, that went away because I told them, geez, I'd love to help you. But, they took my chip and they also took my license. You're on your own. So in a way,
Can't do anything.
yeah, and they understood. And that's always a very fine balance. You have to always be careful, the old adage, free care is no care. That's kind of what happens to our families when so that worked.
Right.
Did you notice the joy of not having the clock? Like, I remember I could do lunches and just sit with people for hours because really I didn't have anything that I had to rush off to do. If somebody had a problem or one of my family members would call, and you could spend 3 or 4 hours, where if you're working, you really can't do that. But I remember that as just being one of the happiest things to do.
That sounds great, because again, I'm in that stage of my life where somebody calls and I've got 5 minutes maybe to talk to them, or they call and I'm rushing kids to practices and games, and I got to go, I'm getting a call from the hospital, that sort of thing. So that sounds like something very much to look forward to, in a couple of years, just having more time to have conversations.
And even if you're not on the clock, it's just after like an hour when you're working, you start to not fall asleep, but I can't just go home and get a nap because I'm working tonight. But I really enjoyed that, just not having the clock look at me all the time.
Well, it also, it takes away your excuse when you come home to your wife. Because before I could say, listen, honey, I've been going since 6:30. I need to rest. Just give me a half hour and then I'll be fine. Meanwhile, she's had the kids all day. She's been putting out fires. She's been balancing the budget. She just wants to talk to an adult. And now I don't have that excuse. Of course, we don't have the children at home now. Well, she thinks she has one at home, but it's...
Actually, I felt kind of sorry for my wife. She was used to having me out of the house for 12 hours, 15 days out of the month doing ER. And all of a sudden she has me sitting there and it's like, geez, it's been 30 years. What do I talk to them about?
Exactly. Dr. Seifert or Dr. Merman, did you have anything to add to the particular question of how did your relationships with your families change?
I'll let Ray take it, and I'll take it after him.
Okay, well, my wife was getting close to being done, and so me being home more, I was able to support her more along the way, because her practice was getting a little overwhelming, and the days they were working, everybody's short-staffed. They were working every weekend and things like that, and she was just wanted to be done. So I kind of kept her. She told them she would give them a year. I'll give you a year notice. I'm done, and so I supported her. My son, when I retired, was chief resident and in the area, and he was so we were able to sort of see him when he had a little bit of free time, so he could decompress and things like that. And my other son works nights, and he's in the Johnstown area, about 2 hours away, so we could sort of see them a little bit more. And so that was a nice thing to see them and support them, emotionally and family and that stuff. So it was good for sure. I'll let Dr. Mirman go.
Thanks, Ray. I think we all have experienced the same thing, is that if you had a family for X number of years and they were used to you essentially not being around, and suddenly you're there, this poses a problem for that person. It poses a problem for you. And as George says, so now what do you talk about? So there's a period there of adjustment, and you have to be willing to, number one, understand that. And just like say, oh, well, I'll be home now and it'll be just hunky-dory and it'd be wonderful. Well, no one's used to that. So it's another part of your life. You have to make adjustments to compensate for the sudden togetherness, being around. And it is a transition. Again, it's another transition, which points out, which everybody has mentioned, you have to retire from something to something. You just don't suddenly close the door and that's all there is. So we've heard people tonight say they're going to go out with friends, they're going to have lunches, they're involved maybe with their wife's activities and so forth, or they start another business, a different occupation on their own level, part-time, nothing serious in particular with demands. And that gives you a chance to get reacquainted with your family, which you really haven't been doing for 30, 40, or 50 years.
Yeah. So like Dr. Mirman said, a common theme tonight has been suddenly being around these people that are used to having you out of the house. Does anybody have any tips to help with that transition? What worked for you? Was it just a matter of time and getting used to each other again? Were there particular strategies that you employed to ease the transition?
I'll start that one off. And we've been talking since the last session. And as you gather, everybody here has, in one way or another, had a plan. They said, well, when I retire, whatever that meant, I'm going to do something. So you go from something to something, and then you sit down with your family and you say, look, I'm considering retiring on December 2nd, whatever it happens to be. What do you think we should be doing? You have to bring the family into your retirement, because that is what you're going to be living with. If you're fortunate to have a family, you want to be together in a new relationship, and it is a new relationship. So it's nice to have these things discussed ahead of time. Angie?
Okay, so discussing it ahead of time seemed to work well. My dad always calls it managing expectations. So it sounds like managing your family's expectations, is a good way to start. Do any of our other panelists have any suggestions in terms of easing that transition?
Well, I'm kind of maybe not the best one to answer that, because I met my wife when she was 17. And we got married as medical students. I was a fourth year, she was a first year. And so this whole thing is always about us being together. And so there was very little transition, because with kids and her, one of us was on call almost every other weekend. So when someone was home and stuff had to be done, you just did it. There was no to communicate. You just picked it up and where it left off. So when we retired, it was a little different, but we very quickly picked up the pace in our relationship and stuff. And so it's been really good.
It sounds like you had already worked through a lot of those transitions. You know, if you met when you were 17, there's a lot of different transitions along the way, and that was almost just one more transition for you to work through. And you know, you've done it before.
And my wife is an elite student. She wasn't a neurotic medical student. You know, she went to class to drink coffee and socialize, and graduated in the top 10% of her class. So I mean, I was fortunate not to have a neurotic medical student wife, because that never entered in the fray, and I was blessed that wasn't part of it. You know.
Angie, there's a flip side to this. You know, we're talking about how did your family deal with you being at home? So my situation is really different than anybody's that I've heard. I was working full-time family medicine and full-time program director, and my husband died suddenly. And I had to make a decision, number one, whether I was going to stay in our home, which we've been here for, you know, at the time he died, 26 and a half years, and care for our home, or try to return to work. I suffered post-traumatic stress. I don't call it a disorder, because if I didn't suffer that, with the situation being as it was, then there'd be something really wrong with me. So I did take some time off, and I went back, not to clinical practice, but to administrative work, to get the residents that I had graduating. But here's my problem. My socialization was things with my husband and travel with my husband and work. I socialized with the people I worked with. My dinner meetings were, you know, figuring out, you know, people's schedules. I interacted with my residents very, very closely. And couple this with COVID, I'm alone. And that was something that I didn't anticipate. So, you know, certainly if you can plan all these things and plan to spend time with your significant other and plan to do this and this and this, that's great. But keep in the back of your head, crap happens. I almost said happens. And, you know, that flexibility. So my big thing and my question is, outside of your family relationships, did your socialization change?
Yes.
I think
How so?
It's amazing the number of opportunities that when you're working, you can't take advantage of. The volunteer opportunities, you know, through church or with family, friends, whatever, it just sort of grows upon itself. I mean, I never really paid much attention to POMA, and I wound up, because didn't have a practice. If somebody needed somebody to cover them at a meeting, they'd give me a call and I'd go in. It not just with POMA, but with an awful lot of other things. You wind up having your time pulled because you're available, and that it's almost a lifeline because you stay engaged.
And I think the whole world of medicine revolves around time and how we use it, how we parcel it out, how we guard it. And to Lisa's point, when you have family and all's well, it's easy. It gets tougher when something out of the blue happens, like happened to her. We have my wife has this saying, and I think it's so true: in order to have good friends, you've got to be a good friend. And I want to tell you from my experience, I wasn't always a good friend that I could have been, because of this time factor that I used as an excuse to, I'll try to get there tomorrow, or I think I can help you for 2 hours on Friday evening if I can. And and sometimes, well, not sometimes, that was on me. And these last 6 years have given me the time, and through my wife, the awareness that, if you want to have those close relationships, now that you can't fall back on medicine and use it as an excuse, you need to get out there and you need to work on those. At the end of the day, if we can count on our hand the number of close friends that we have, we're lucky. And so that's been part of my, what I call rehab. I've been trying to cultivate those relationships deeper than what they were when it was just casual seeing somebody at the gym, at the high school gym, at a basketball game, or at church, or on the golf course, or in the neighborhood. But that's a work in progress. And I think retirement gives us that opportunity if that's important to us, or we need to work on it.
Okay. Dr. Seifert or Dr. Merman, do you have anything to add to Dr. Wolters and Dr. Long's answers?
Well, the summation of all this is, once again, you're retiring from something to something. And that behooves all of us as we are looking down the road to have these external activities, no matter what they are, no matter how minimal they seem. That's what's going to be there when you put the final key in the door and you turn the lock. What do you have left? We have left all that you have made contacts with and build up. That doesn't guarantee that will continue that way, but you have a running start. And interestingly enough, and I think you've heard this, you're going to make new friends. You're going to make, not only the friends you have will be stronger, but you're going to find there's more people out there now that you can relate with and enjoy their company. And you start enjoying their company, whether it's with your spouse or your family, or just the two of you or three of you in a group. One group I'm familiar with, I don't belong, it's out of this area. It's called the Romeos, retired old men that go out. And I know somebody that's in it, and it's given him a great deal of satisfaction. And he retired about a year ago, and he had this in the back pocket. And when the time came, he pulled it out and was able to make a very nice transition that way. That helped him spread his wings, get out to society. Thank God his wife understands all this, and she's very, very relieved that he has such activities. Ray?
We have been social with several families, like 4 families. My wife and I are both from small families, so now we have like 4 larger extended families where we've gone on vacation. My medical school roommate, we're still very close. We vacation together. His kids still call me Uncle Ray. I mean, it's and our neighborhood is a very special place. We've gone through about 3 rounds of people coming, raising families, moving out, new families, new kids, moving out. And then we're on the 3rd generation in our neighborhood, and it's a very special place. I mean, we're included in a lot of the activities and get-togethers and good neighbors and friendships. So we're really blessed in that regard. We really had a lot of social activities along the way, and now we're able to participate even more.
That's great. So I think the big question on a lot of people's minds, what do you wish you had known about retirement that you didn't know before you retired? Anybody that wants to jump in first?
I was
Angie,
scared. Oh,
Angie, it's different. You go from 100 miles an hour down to 5 miles an hour, and it's like the change is you're not in the middle of everything. You're just another one of the people, and it's a little difficult to get used to. But as my wife says, she shared me with everybody for 36 years. Now she's got me for herself, and we started planning our retirement at least 5 or 6 years ago. Fortunately, my son Joe, Zawisza, your husband and my daughter are doctors, and they just kind of moved in, and we switched the responsibility to him. And I was going to retire last September, but we went to the AOA in July, and I got COVID for the second time, and my body rebelled. Everything crashed. So July 30th, he said, "You can retire now." And I said, "Okay." And that was it. What did I do to keep me busy? Once I recovered from the COVID, there's a tree that we had cut down on the top of a hill, and the stump bothered me. So I started digging up the stump. And when it was done, there was a 6-foot deep hole that was 10 by 6, and my grandchildren helped me knock it down the hill. And now I'm looking for other stuff to do, but you have to have something to do, because geez, the people that I had in the practice who retired, whose work was their life, in 6 months, they were gone. They died of boredom. They didn't have anything to do. So that's me.
Did everybody who went to that AOA convention get COVID? Because it sure feels like it.
A lot of people did. Unbeknownst to us, my brother-in-law was at the hotel across the street. And when he came back to Shamokin, he had COVID also. Now, I don't know why my son didn't get it, but I got it, and it knocked me for a loop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For those of you who don't know, the person speaking was Dr. Mike Zawisza. He, like he said, he just retired this past July, and is also my father-in-law. So that's his claim to fame, really. No, I'm just kidding.
Nice. Nice.
You know, all the past president of POMA stuff and everything like that. So, anything else want to chime in with things that they wish they had known about retirement?
Just, spent years being afraid of it. I really thought it was just, I would retire and pass on in a month because there wouldn't be anything to do. And boy, was I wrong. It is, as everybody said, it's just another part of life. Truth is, it's a really good part of life.
I think one thing we haven't touched upon, but everyone is living it, and you can hear it underneath all the comments. Yes, you have to start planning ahead of time if you have that ability to do so. You don't want to be forced into retirement at the last moment. And part of that planning, because you really don't know what's going to happen, but you certainly know one thing: your income isn't going to be the same. And I think some more thought should be given to that and the pre-retirement years. And I do say years in plural because spending is so much. Whether you have an annuity or you have Social Security, which is a government annuity, or you have investments, whatever they are, suddenly this is your source of income. Even if you have a part-time job, it is part-time and you've not been living a part-time life. So one of the things, once again, you discuss with the family is, okay, so we're going to not have this income from my practice. My salary is not going to be there. My benefits may be there. We don't know. How are we going to handle this? And that's a serious discussion. And you can't have it too soon in the world, because you can start someplace and modify it as you go along. But if you don't have a starting point and you wake up the next morning and a key has locked the door and you have nothing, and then you start from scratch, say, well, my goodness gracious, now what do I do?
It's amazing the advantage both a good accountant and a good lawyer will make. I mean, I had no trouble at all, but I had accountants and lawyers that have been with me for 20 years. So they eased the road considerably.
When I was asked that question in the earlier panel, I said the biggest surprise for me in retirement was I got old. and it's easy to kind of sit around a little more if you're not careful. And I remember my first day of medical school, Nick Nicholas told us stasis is bad. You were built to move, and you need to keep moving and make sure you move every day. And so that's an adjustment I've made in retirement, because if I find that I don't move every day, then things start stiffening and seizing up, and the motion is good. So that was probably my biggest adjustment in retirement, is that I need to actively, regularly exercise if I want to do the things that I want to do.
Mm-hmm.
To Dr. Merriman's point, I think finances are something that we really neglect in med school. And I think it would behoove the colleges to start early, especially once you get into those residency internship years, because one of the things that I've seen our residents who graduate do is they come out and the first thing they do is they figure out how to spend, and they spend like drunken sailors. And 5 years down the road, they find themselves at an impasse where I can only work so many hours. My income is based on what I kill. So I can only do so much. And I think, you know, as we get older and as we practice, we learn how to save, we learn how to invest, we learn how to manage, but it's trial and error for most of us. At least it was for me. Then we get to the end of the road, and maybe this, we don't know what to do sometimes once we retire with the estate that we've created. Now, please, I'm not saying that I have this huge estate and I got so much money I don't know what to do with it. That's not what I'm trying to say. Is I think sometimes I think it would have helped if somebody would have said, you know, at the end of the day, you're not going to have this expense, you're not paying for this, and you're not doing this, you're not. So you're going to have some money coming in with Social Security, pensions, IRAs, investments, outside funding, real estate, whatever you're into. But what are you going to do with it? You're going to go out and buy the biggest car you can buy and a plane? Or are there some other philanthropic things that you're going to do with your money? And it's individual. I understand. Some people give it to their college, some people give it to their med school, some people give it to their family. But there doesn't seem to be anything early on where people are there saying, hey, Brent, what's your plan? And I think that would have been helpful. I think we can, as time goes on, we all figure it out what to do with what we've created. But it's almost like when we're dealing with our residents and our interns and some of our colleagues have been in practice 4, 5, 6 years, we don't want to talk about, well, so are you putting any money away for your retirement? How are you planning for the next step? And I think sometimes that would be helpful.
Angela, it's Dominic.
Yes.
My grandmother always used to say, live below your means. And she was absolutely right, and it's worked. But the other thing I wanted to talk about is in some of the, now I'm not retired yet. I slowed down to full time last year. But in some of my research, they were talking about the different stages of retirement. And talking to George's point, you know, when you first retire, lots of people actually go through, you know, some periods of depression. And you have to get through that so that you can move on to your next stage of retirement. Whether you do volunteer work, you work part-time, you have some hobby that's fulfilling, but you don't sit on your rear end doing nothing, because everybody's right. If that happens, you're not going to be here long. You know, and then eventually, you know, in the last stage of retirement, you're too old to do anything. But we hope we all get to that stage. So, and I think that's one of the other things that we maybe should focus on for us that are getting close to retirement is, you know, how do we make that transition? How do we keep from getting in a funk and getting depressed? And, you know, because I understand how that can happen. You know, you lose your control, your authority, you know, you're not wanted, needed as much as you had been over the years.
To that
Can
point,
I add,
I think
can I
that
add
point,
to the question?
it turns out that everyone that has spoken, including Dom, everyone who has spoken has brought out the fact that medicine should not be the end all and be all of every day of your life when you're practicing. It's very important to develop outside thoughts, activities, even if it's just liking concert music on the Victrola. How's that for a reference? So you have something there going for you to hang up on.
By the way.
There was somebody that started to talk. With that.
So yeah, Dominic was the smart kid in the class, and he hasn't retired either. How do you give up that thought that you just, if you retire, you may want to get back into it? And I'm real close, but I still like getting up in the morning, going to work. I still like my patients. I even still take call and deliver babies. That may be stupid, but it's still fun. But I also am 70 years old, and real soon, you know, I don't want to have to look at the clock anymore. So how do you make that stupid decision?
Take a trial retirement.
What does that mean?
What does a trial retirement mean for the person that answered?
That was Dr. Merriman.
Okay, Dr. Mirman, you're on mute, but sir.
Okay, I'll press that button. How's that one?
That's great.
Technology is wonderful, isn't it? Trial retirement, I think, is really great for a lot of people. They don't know. They're caught up in medicine. Whatever they're doing is their life. And you got to back off. And some people can do it gracefully and some people can't. But the only way to get involved at all is to start. So if you work 5 days a week, you make it 4, 3.5. But more importantly is when you have that time off, you just don't sit around. That's the time you start experimenting with what else you're going to do when you finally have no medical practice. And it could, yes, it could be teaching. It could be volunteer. It could be rowing your boat. Something you haven't done perhaps, and now you're getting time to do it, but you're not used to doing it. You're not doing anything because you're so wrapped up with all your life's work that you just don't realize that you have a life.
So Jerry was one of the youngest guys in our class. And Dave Barron was also in that group. And Dave's
Yes.
coming here next week for a lecture, by the way.
Where's he? He's coming up to your area?
Up to Lewisburg. Yep, he's going to do a lecture. He was the youngest guy in our class, I think.
Yeah, he was my roommate. Tell him I said hi. I'm going to Texas to see my grandchildren next week.
All right, enjoy. But that's what retirement's going to be about, right?
Yeah, a lot more. Yes.
All right, I want to be cognizant of time. We've had a great discussion so far, and hopefully the time has flown for you as fast as it's flown for me. But wrapping up here, question for our panelists and then for any of the retirees that are signed in tonight. Do you ever miss it? And how do you cope with that feeling? I saw Dr. Lisa shaking her head, yes.
I miss the people. I miss helping folks figure out the puzzle, put the puzzle pieces together, but I still have the opportunity to do that. I can't tell you how many times. Just the other day, a friend of a friend said, "Hey, would you mind taking a look at this and explain to me what these words mean?" So, you know, I'm still useful as a doctor person. There's more that I don't miss than what I miss, if that makes sense.
Okay. Absolutely. What she's saying.
Would anybody
else like to chime in to that particular question?
Yeah, I think that she says we have a curse on us. And the curse on our head is that forever will be known as a doctor and a physician. And I don't care who you are, where you are, once somebody finds that out, just beware, they're going to try and utilize that, what they think you know or should be doing, and they won't leave you alone. But you can handle it. Everyone here has been able to handle that. But that comes with the territory, folks. That's just the way it is. And it's nothing to be afraid of.
That's why I bake cookies.
Okay. At this time, I'd like to invite anybody that had any questions for our panelists to go ahead and.
I have a question. Jason, here,
yes,
POMA staff.
Jason.
As a man whose father-in-law just retired today at 75 years old from big time legal, advice from my side as a as a kid of him, how to help them transition into this best we can. Because I know he's going to be bored. I'm going to have lots of lunches with bears. I'm going to call him next couple months. But how can I help him on the other side of it as well?
CBD ointment. It's your new best friend.
Put that on your tongue, don't you?
No, those are the gummies.
Well, other than CBD ointment, does anybody have any suggestions for Jason?
Jason, just include them. Just include them. You know, when you have a family activity, make sure he's invited. If you're working on a project and he's knowledgeable about something, ask his input. You know, I just during this conversation, one of my nieces sent me a message asking me if I would make cupcakes for her 3-year-old's birthday party. Absolutely. You know, Dr. Mirman, I appreciate, you know, you saying that forever you'll be noted as, you know, a physician. For me, I'm the perpetual Aunt Lisa, and that's okay with me.
There is a question. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I'll let the question go. I have a comment for later.
Okay. There is a question in the chat. Has anyone pursued medical volunteerism? And if so, through what program, and what was your experience so far?
Mine was kind of bad. I was told I would be a volunteer faculty to help come back with exams, oral exams, things like that. So I did. And then my chief came up to me red in the face and said, HR called and you have to leave. You're a liability. And I started laughing and I said, it took you 17 years to figure that out. But it turns out they didn't have policies for volunteer faculty. So if there was any issue, somebody said that maybe I mistreated them or didn't give them a fair grade or something like that, there was no policy to protect me or the college. So I couldn't participate as a volunteer because there were no policies to deal with volunteer faculty. So my first attempt at it kind of crashed and burned.
I've done some medical mission trips, but not since I've been retired. So I really can't comment on that, but my experience on medical mission trips are excellent.
Okay. Dr. Seifert, you had a comment.
Just a quick comment, and I don't want to get into financial planning, but I just want to encourage every student or young attending to work with a certified financial planner to get the basic financial financial goals in mind, and that because you're going to want some money to live on, you don't want to be thinking about it when you're 50. And just a rule of thumb, there are lots of calculators, but if you think $200,000 a year would be what your retirement income would be, or your current salary, one of the calculators, you need about 25 times your current salary in retirement funds, not necessarily a 401k, but you know, in assets to retire. So if 200,000 works for you, you'll be looking at about 5 million in your retirement assets when you retire, and that's stocks, bond investments, and retirement vehicles. So just something think about and to work early with a financial planner.
So the second Dr. Seifert's mentioned, but understand that who's not familiar, the certified financial planner is a designation. It's an earned designation, and the person has to qualify for that. It's not some guy down the road that happens to have a very nice office and charges a nice fee. That's not how certified financial planners work. So I agree with them 100%. So I get involved with them in what I do, and there could be a great asset. And the sooner you get started, the better it is.
Yep. Agreed. Thank you.
All right, Lisa, I know you had a question or a comment.
So this is actually a question to the panelists here that have active retired license. So several doctors approached me as being the champion of the education pillar. They said, you know, Lisa, we have our active retired license. We don't need all those credits, but we really miss the socialization since we've been getting the annual clinical assembly back in person again. Really excited about the new venue. I am just feeling people out. I'm probably going to have our president, Dr. Collada, help me put out a survey monkey. If POMA were to create a registration type for the annual clinical assembly for active retired physicians, in person only, that they would get their required opioid if needed and child abuse education, but still have access to all the other social events of the annual clinical assembly and auditing the other lectures if they wish to do that. Is that something that you would be interested in? You'd still
That's
be
an
able to,
excellent idea.
Absolutely.
you'd still be able to get the discounted rate at the hotel. And I'm not talking the, you know, $400 registration. I'm talking $100, but that would also get you, you know, the banquet, the breakfasts, and then the CME credit that you need for your active retired license. That you'd have to, you know, maybe attest that, yes, I carry an active retired license. I understand I'm just getting these credits. But again, not set in stone, but I need to see if there's interest in that before we take it to the Board of Trustees to approve something like that.
George, she's on the committee.
To be clear, there will be breakfast, right?
Lisa, that is an excellent idea.
Lisa,
Absolutely.
it's a really good idea. And Dr. Long, you can go through the line twice.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that.
I'll tell you what, for those that weren't at Kalahari this year, it was wonderful. John, your banquet was fabulous. The band was so good. And the lectures, I mean, they're still available to purchase on demand. They are phenomenal. I have one more day to listen, or half of a day to listen to. So good. So, but that actually came from a couple active retired docs that would really like to have gone, but they couldn't justify paying, you know, $500 plus. So
I wish I had thought of that, Lisa.
let me hammer it out, and let me I'll sit down and I'll talk with Dr. Collada. We'll send out probably a survey monkey to see what the interest would be. And then the next step would be, you know, put it together and then take it to the Board of Trustees for approval.
Well, you have my vote on that board. You have one vote so far. So, all right. Does anybody else have any comments or questions? Somebody must be outside. I actually literally hear crickets chirping instead of the silent. You
can hear the birds at my house.
maybe that's what I'm hearing. Maybe.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you to everyone.
I hear crickets 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for the last 35 years.
Especially with your Kalahari band.
Risk band. Well, thank you everyone for attending. Thank you especially to our lead panelists for being a part of our discussion tonight and for last month as well. Both last month's episode and this episode will be available in some version on social media. At some point in time, we will email you when it is available so that you can, take a look back on what was the answer to that question again. But again, thank you so much for joining us tonight. If you have any comments or questions, things that you would like the mentor community to take on this next year, please let Jason know, or you can email me as well. So, or Dr. Collada, anybody. So thanks so much, guys. Have a good night.
Thanks for having me.
Good night. Thank you.
Thanks,
Good
Jason.
night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you.
See
Thank
you
you
guys
all.
later.
Nice
Thank
job,
you.
Angie.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good work, Ange.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jason.